You're welcome back. It's still Daybreak here on Trust TV, and if you're just joining us, well, it's been an interesting and I would say informative show we've had this morning. But we're now going to be going to our discussion segment, so we're touching on something a bit different. There was an information or news that came out yesterday, and a lot of people are talking about it. So why not? Let's talk about it here on Trust TV. We'll be looking at Gaza Ceasefire Deal, and we'll be analysing its implications around the world. Now, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire and hostage exchange mediated by Qatar, though Israel says some issues remain unresolved. The three-phase deal starts with a 6-week ceasefire, during which Hamas will release 33 hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Later phases will address the release of remaining hostages, troop withdrawals, and Gaza's reconstruction. Israel will publish the list of prisoners to be freed, allowing a 48-hour appeal period for victim families. This follows the October 7 Hamas attack that killed 1,200 in Israel and the ongoing military campaign in Gaza, which has reportedly caused over 46,700 deaths and widespread displacement. Hamas holds 94 hostages, including 34 presumed dead, but in another development, the Israeli military has killed at least over 40 Palestinians, despite the truce announced recently. Now, with us today to talk about the ceasefire deal and its implications around the world, what it means, what you need to know about it, better understanding, we have Ambassador Warkani, formerly with the ECOWAS Commission, Deputy Chair, Nigerian UN Social and Economic Council, and he's also a security and international affairs expert. Thank you so much for joining us. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Lilian, and viewers, good morning.
Good morning to you, sir. So it's been 15 months of lots of back and forth. Israel, Hamas, the US and Qatar and, other countries trying to mediate and create a common ground. What's your take on the ceasefire deal happening at this point in time?
Well, the ceasefire deal is, or ceasefire to be, because it's a welcome development generally for everyone, because the Palestinian crisis has become a crisis for everyone globally, because it has involved so many people, so many institutions and what have you. And incidentally, this is one scenario that has given the world something that has never happened or rarely happens. That is to say, the declaration that the Secretary General of the United Nations was declared persona non grata in Israel is unprecedented for a country to unilaterally declare that a whole Secretary General of the United Nations becomes persona non grata in its jurisdiction. That is the implication of what we are talking about. And now, the world has waited since last year for a ceasefire to create at least a break in the violence that we have seen. And this is the first, let's say, television war that one can say. On daily basis, counts of death and destruction faces almost everyone that watches television or listens to other news systems or social media coverage and the rest of them. And it's been heartbreaking to see people dying, including women, children, and sometimes even the non-participants in all this. So, the ceasefire announcement is a great news. What we don't know yet is how the implementation shall go. Because there are a lot of issues there that are like buried. And as they become unearthed over time, it will become obvious that there will be some flaws and there will be some implications, generally for the Middle East and the globe. So it's something that everybody prayed for, particularly the suffering Gaza people. And now it has come. There's jubilation around the area to say, yes, finally, ceasefire is here. But as you can see, ceasefire on 3 phases, and each phase having some complications that if you do not implement faithfully, it could jeopardize the ceasefire quality itself. And so we are not very far away from violence. we might be reaping the benefits of the ceasefire. So it's a both, let's say, double-edged sword. Because there is definitely violence fatigue on both sides. Israel is tired. The amount of money spent, bombing alone, for each bomb costing close to $100,000 or more, depending on which type. You can imagine how many were dropped on Palestine over this period, Gaza Strip alone, and how many lives lost, children that's their future truncated, and women that don't have any future whatsoever to think of, then family heads that don't know where they may be next minute. Everybody was working like a walking corpse in Gaza. And families and livelihoods have been displaced over and over again. Northern Gaza is literally empty. And you see, when you have such a ceasefire, one of the items there will be reconstruction.
Yeah, talking about that now, you made mention earlier of, this ceasefire deal. It's good, temporary halt in hostilities and all of that. But do you think it's going to address the root cause of the conflicts in the first place? Or is it merely just a pause in tensions?
Well, actually, addressing the root cause of this conflict, no. Very, very far from it. Very far. And I can tell you too that Israel has simply been pressured into accepting this deal because of the hostages. Because its war objective was to destroy Hamas. Now the position is Hamas is still alive, like a beetle. You've mashed the head, you have done everything, you climbed on Hamas, you have squeezed Hamas to the ground, but Hamas is still alive. And therefore, the primary war objective of Israel, to destroy Hamas, has not been achieved. And so, the state of Israel is still in a flux as far as this crisis is concerned. The root cause of this crisis is far beyond October 7 last year. And so, solving this problem is beyond what is happening right now. So there may be a thaw today to say, okay, no more hostilities, we can now talk and what have you. But the greatest question that needs to be addressed, which seems to have no answers, is a day after the truce, who controls Gaza? What kind of governance structure that will ensure peace and tranquility within Gaza and Israel? Because for Israel, it is to have peace. For Gazans, it is to have liberty. And the two things are unable to be achieved within this context because both of them are diametrically opposed to a point where each one asks for the removal or destruction of the other. Hamas says Israel must be removed from their land, and therefore Israel has no right to exist. Israel says we have a right to exist because the United Nations and other bodies have endorsed the 1948 declaration, Balfour Declaration, establishing the State of Israel, new State of Israel. Now, for you to say we have no right to exist and Israel must be removed, where do you remove us to? And what happens? Israel says, okay, you don't also have a right to exist in that case. There were times when Israel was pressurized to believe and act that, okay, you have a right to exist, but please exist in peace and tranquility. Go and run your affairs in Gaza. Run a government or something that looks like a government. Try to be democratic so that there can be changes. This terrorist posture and calling for the destruction of the state of Israel should stop. Let us have peace. We can still manage this space and have peace amongst us. It has been impossible because the ideology of Hamas has been an extreme ideology. And until and unless Hamas leadership realizes that from the utterances to its position, and it's educating its own citizens on how to foster peace within that enclave, I don't think there will be a solution to this problem.
So you're saying that there will most likely be tensions, might not get this far, but the tensions are far from coming to an end.
Certainly.
All right. Now let's talk about the roles of the Western world in all of this now. People looked on the US with a different point of view, seeing the havoc, Israel put on Hamas and, the humanitarian crisis, even with the US still backing it now. We saw, Western nations like the US playing a significant role, even in brokering the peace in the long run, but we all know where US stood through all of it. Now, at this point in time, do you see any shifts in the global balance of power, especially with the role US played in the war throughout and other bodies that came in to see that this ceasefire was brokered, and the role they played during the war and when it was all happening? Do you see any balance or how this will affect world power?
Well, the strategic balance of power within the Middle East in particular, and then globally, is such that first and foremost, at the tactical level, Biden administration is out or going, and so it was pressurized to make sure it put on record that the ceasefire deal was struck during its administration. And so it has mounted exceptional pressure on Netanyahu in particular, and the Israeli government in general, to say, you must get a deal. The incoming government of Trump equally is like wanting to score a point, to say it was its own pressure and positioning that facilitated this ceasefire in a way. So everybody is trying to claim something. For the Israelis, they have been under tremendous pressure from within. The domestic pressure have been building up as a result of these hostages that have been kept all along. And the greatest wonder, let me say, of this century is that Israel, with all its sophisticated military apparatus, was unable to locate the hostages and in commando style release them from the clutches of Hamas. This is very, very significant in all this. Now, this is going to be that Israel will want to see that these hostages are released. And let us keep in mind that these hostages are hostages of multi-nations. They are not only Israeli citizens. I think that is the more pressure that Israel had. Because some of these countries like America, UK, have been mounting pressure for their own nationals, much more than whatever you can think of. And so politicians at home will always want to say, we did this, we scored this goal, we were able to get our hostages out of danger and harm's way or whatever. Now, you can see in Israel itself, some of relations of the hostages are even saying, we might be able to forego the lives of our own only for Hamas to be extinguished, so that we don't have to come back to this again. Good. That's how far some Israelis have gone, encouraging Netanyahu to continue, not even sign this ceasefire deal. So you can see there are some complications even within Israel itself. The ultra-right parties and the rest of them are still not with Netanyahu for any deal whatsoever. They don't want any deal. And then behind the scene, they have always expected that, having removed Hamas and its people, the Gazans, Palestinians, from particularly northern Gaza, that place should be declared an annexed territory. And so Israel will have a right to occupy. That's why you saw movement of populations to evacuate, and these people have evacuated more than 10 times. It was all in an effort to dislocate these people completely and then take over this land for some other purposes. There are a lot of Israelis who are ready to go and start new settlements in Gaza Strip. So the implications are beyond what people normally will see. There are some salient issues that seems not to be on the agenda of the world, but it is there. You cannot deny it. You can't run away from it. So globally, There are plenty of things that the world has to actually look at.
Okay.
And now, peace in the Middle East means peace generally for that part of the world. Egypt has suffered more than the country that were at war, because the flux of refugees, the logistic nightmare of handling trucks, and all matters related to movement of food,
and
supplies, and what have you. Good. And then the fear of an influx and a growth of a cell of Palestinians within Egypt itself is also something of concern to Egypt. So you see, when the Egyptian government has put in so much money, time, resources, and concern to make sure there's a ceasefire, it is also protecting its own. And therefore, these are implications for neighbors. You can see what is happening. Qatar has been there at a point we know Qatar almost said they are no longer doing, no longer supporting. You have hosted Hamas leadership in diaspora and given them all the necessary diplomatic cover to move around the world and do so many things. So there are implications for everybody. Trade has been affected globally. As you know, the Red Sea became a no-go area for international shipping lines because of the attacks by Houthi rebels in Yemen onto all this lane. And the Red Sea has become one of the most important shipping lines in the world. You cannot do without it easily. Now, the cost of that had meant that people around the world are paying more for every good supplied through the Red Sea because of increased insurance and some other logistics concerns.
So this has affected commercial and economic activities worldwide one way or another.
Very well.
But let's bring this back down now to Nigeria. We know that Nigeria has always had a way of supporting, Palestine in international forums. Where has this put our diplomatic stance as Nigeria?
Well, sincerely, on different times and fora, we have always said Nigeria's voice has been almost silent in international affairs recently. We seem not to exist as a country anymore because prior to now, Nigeria had been a very key player in international relations. Unfortunately, for the past 9 years or so, we have lost that position, sadly. And we have seemed to be just like any other country. Whereas in Africa, generally, Nigeria's voice was regarded as the voice of the continent. Now, having lost that, particularly, you can see what happened. South Africa took Israel to the ICC. Even though there were more pertinent issues on the continent, South Africa decided, for reasons best known to it, to go to the ICC and submit Israel to litigation and what have you. And now, Nigeria on its own could not say anything. We were neither here nor there. Therefore, for now, we are a silent giant, I think sleeping. That's the unfortunate side of it, which shouldn't have been, because if our former foreign ministers were to come and comment, I'm sure each one of them will be very sad that Nigeria has descended to this level.
All right. Now, at this point in time, while the giant is still sleeping, what lessons can they pick, from this whole, Nigeria is struggling with its own security challenge. I want to believe that's probably why they didn't speak, You people should do your own. We have our own that we are battling with here. So let us just face our fronts and, face our own. We are battling with insecurity here in Nigeria, from bandits to kidnapping to insurgency. It's all happening here at home. So what can they pick from this Israel, Hamas conflict in terms of counterterrorism strategies and addressing insurgencies?
Well, supposedly we should be learning plenty of lessons. Security strategy in particular ought to have been such that Nigeria would have created more avenues for relationships across the globe. The way conflicts are handled domestically and internationally should have been something we would have been learning a lot of lessons. But however, we seem not to have done that. The domestic issues have kind of overwhelmed the country beyond belief, because here is a country that had been in the forefront of peacekeeping missions around the world. There was hardly any peacekeeping mission since 1945 that Nigerians, as colonial or independent Nigeria, that we didn't participate. And so we have gathered a lot of experience. And so one would expect that that pedigree should have given us a leverage this time around to say we are also making a point. Unfortunately, that has not been. And the lessons for insurgency in particular, or banditry and all these conflicts, is such that we are not alone. We are not alone. And most likely, if there was peace in the Middle East, it also has an assuaging effect on what is happening internally. Because our internal conflicts are not necessarily internally bred. They have international connections. If you watch recently, you could see that the DHQ, that's defense, is claiming that there are international interference in our domestic conflict, which is very true, because the funding, the ideology itself is coming from outside.
All right.
The insurgents are insisting that they want essentially a Sharia nation established in Nigeria across board, which is a foreign ideology for sure. And the source, being largely Iran, is fueling some of these things. And you can see clearly the Middle East crisis has exposed the links between Iran and Hezbollah, Iran and Hamas, Iran and the Houthis. All these are terrorist cells, let's say, that have been promoted by Iran, such that if you remove Iran from the scene, chances are that there will be peace around the world, a little better than what we have today.
All right, that's a lot of lessons to be learned. But quickly now, we've actually run out of time. So in a very summarized way, let's touch a bit back on Africa. We see what's happening with Nigeria and Niger, Burkina Faso, the whole military takeover, France drama and all of that. What would you say we could learn from this to foster peace, within Africa, to avoid, local tensions from exacerbating?
Well, it's unfortunate that Nigeria went the way it did, and fostering peace within neighbors should have been our most important pastime. Because without this neighborliness, good neighborliness and peace, there will be no mutual protection. And without any mutual protection, no nation actually exists in isolation. And so, particularly the relationship between us and Niger had been so badly handled in a way that, now there seems to be a scenario where a country is thinking of building even a wall across the borders, which is very sad. Now, Nigeria as a giant in Africa, whether we like it or not, we will still need to come back home and rethink our strategy. Our relationship must improve.
Okay.
And that can only happen if we have confidence of our neighbors that we are doing the right things. Now, when our neighbors reject France outrightly, and we went and accepted France wholeheartedly, I think that is the greatest disservice we can do to even ourselves. And that needs rethinking, because without these countries, our borders are more than porous.
Sure that.
Good. And they have done so much in the past to prevent some of these terrorists from flocking into our country. Now, if we agree that there is an international dimension to this conflict, it means it requires us to also
collaborate with our
team up.
neighbors a lot more.
Very good. And they will guarantee us more peace than what we think. And collaboration in Africa, whether we like it or not, since we cannot disentangle Africa as it is today, we will still live here together. These administrations as we have them today will phase out. One day, there will be no more. All the leadership, the governance, whatever, will go. These countries will remain.
Sure.
Therefore, that should be the underpinning factor that should determine how we go as a nation.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Warkani. It's always a very, very insightful, educating, and eye-opening, discussion with you here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us and, opening our minds to all the intricacies surrounding the international waters. It's good to have you.
Thank you, viewers, and thank you.
All right, we've come to the end of this segment, so we're going on a quick break. When we get back, we'll be looking at stories that made it to the front pages of the newspaper. Just stay tuned. We'll be right back.